All right, guys, my name is James Conigrave, and I'm a PhD student here at the IPPE. I'm under Professor Joseph Chirochi and Dr. Bhajinder Sadra, which I'm very privileged to do. Just briefly about myself, I come from a public health background, so I have a very sort of zoomed out sort of lens generally, that's my bias. But today I want to look at growth mindset. So the key question I'm interested in so far is basically how can we convince people to stick with self-development programs? We've known since the 50s that exercise is the panacea for all problems, and yet you still have people that have heart disease and they're told if you don't start moving, you're going to die, literally, and it's still very difficult to get them off the couch. So one avenue that I thought might be useful was via growth mindset. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the history behind growth mindset, some of the problems we face in this research field, and where we've started moving along, figuring out is this a viable option and where is growth mindset appropriate. So we'll start where everyone is familiar. In 1998, Carol Dweck and Claudia Mueller took a bunch of fifth graders and she got them to do a very basic IQ test. So she did one of those tests where you get patterns on blocks and you have to match them to the researchers. And they started with a very easy trial, and the only difference was to one group they praised them for their ability, and for the other group they praised them for their effort. So for the ability they said, "Good job, Timmy, you are amazing at this task." And for effort they said, "Wow, you tried really hard." So obviously these students at the start, there was no difference between them. But then they got them to do an incredibly difficult task that was not possible to complete. And they measured their persistence, and they found, funnily enough, the people that were praised for effort, they actually persisted longer at this task. After this, they asked them, would you like to now do an even more difficult task or go back to the easier ones? They found those that were praised for ability by far wanted to go back to the easy task where they could excel. But those praised for effort, they sought out the challenge, they enjoyed the challenge more. They then completed more trials when they went back to the easy task. So suddenly, these people that were performing exactly the same on that easy task, now there's a large difference between them. And they had learning goals too, those praised for effort. So you can see in this graph, trial 1 is the first easy task, trial 3 is the second easy task. You can see that solid line is the one where they're praised for their ability, the intelligence praise. And you can see there's a sharp drop. The dotted line going straight up is those praised for effort, there's a sharp rise, and the one in the middle is a control praise, like, good job, Timmy. So the world really went crazy with this. This is just one of those studies that really captured the public imagination. I think because it's so relatable, because this is the kind of praise we've given to our own kids or our friends' kids to try and positively affirm them, and yet it was detrimental. And so you see this a lot, even like cropping up now in news articles. You'll still see this one study coming up. And the American educational system actually has gone a bit crazy with it. And so this is great. It's great when research hits the public like this and they run with it. But at the same time, it becomes disembodied from the field of research that it's originally from. So that's what I want to talk a bit more about. So what we're actually talking about is implicit theories of attribute malleability, more commonly called growth mindset, because that's not as immediately intimidating. An implicit theory is any conception about the world that isn't actually spoken. So for instance, some people think with the air conditioning unit, if you turn it up to 40 degrees, it'll heat more quickly. And then when it reaches the desired temperature, you turn it down and then it will stop and you'll be there more rapidly. Whereas in reality, you set it to a temperature, it reaches a temperature, then turns off. It doesn't stress out if it's got longer to go. So that would be an implicit theory of air conditioner functioning. An implicit theory of attribute malleability is just the extent to which you believe your attributes or other people's attributes can vary over time. So this essentially is coming from a field of research from Albert Bandura, and Carol Dweck built on this with him. So the self-efficacy research, where the basic finding is if you believe you're going to be good at something, that actually gives you a performance boost in and of itself. So then they ask the question, well, what if you believe that you're not going to be good at it, but you believe your ability can change? Does that have an impact? And the finding was, yes, it does, which sort of led into this growth mindset field. So depending on where you fall on this spectrum, if you fall on the right-hand side where you really believe attributes can change and vary, we'd call you an incremental theorist because you believe you can improve in increments. And the visual metaphor I'm going to give you is building a pot out of clay. So if you're dissatisfied with a pot, you don't have to fret. You can just build it up more the way you like. And if you fall on the other side, you believe that you're fixed and you can't improve, we'd call you an entity theorist. And the visual metaphor I'll give you is of finding a fully formed pot in the ground that you're digging up as an archaeologist. And in this case, if you find something you don't like, your only option is to stop digging there and start digging elsewhere. And we'll find that's actually a fairly accurate visual metaphor as we go along. So the way we think this works is through lay dispositionism, or the tendency to make trait attributions. There was a series of studies done in the early 90s where Erdely and Dweck were looking at how children respond to different descriptors of other people. So they got a bunch of fifth graders together and they gave them some social vignettes. So little Timmy, he stole something. And they asked him, what can you tell us about Timmy? And the people that are entity theorists, people who believe that their abilities can't change, they'll far more likely to say, well, Timmy is a thief. That's who he is categorically. Where people with a growth mindset or an incremental theorist, they are more likely to stay away from these trait attributions. So they make these trait attributions. Also, when they asked, well, what should we do with people like Timmy who steal, the entity theorists, the people that believe people don't change, were more likely to dish out harsher punishments, so saying, well, you know, lock him up or give him 1,000 detentions. And also we find, generally, entity theorists are more likely to stereotype others. There's been some experimentation with college students where they found that they're quicker to make racial judgments when pictures come up. So we think it definitely has a lot to do with trait attributions. But these don't just extend to others. Obviously, these trait attributions extend to the self. There was quite a sad experiment by Erdely in 1997 where they got a bunch of kids and they told them they had the opportunity to apply to be a pen pal of someone as part of a pen and pal club. But all they had to do first is write a letter of recommendation for themselves, like, yes, hi, I'm James, I'm a really loyal friend, I'm good at sport, I really like Doctor Who, can I be your pen and pal kind of thing? And inevitably they get back the response, well, we're not actually sure that we want you to be our pen pal. And so they looked at how the kids respond to that. And I'm not quite sure how this got past ethics. Yeah. But the entity theorists, they found, they were more likely to blame this social failure on an overarching inability to make friends at all. So even though it's quite an ambiguous response, like we're not sure if we want you to be our pen pal, they took that to mean I'm rubbish at making friends, full stop. I mean, where do you go from that? There's no sort of like, well, maybe I'll try and improve this. It's like, no, you're bad at making friends. And on top of this, they weren't interested in learning as a result. They just wanted to hide the fact that they couldn't make friends. So clearly failure is important, and trait attributions from that failure. And that's why what we think was happening in Dweck's original experiment with the ability and effort. So if you tell a kid that they're good for their ability, then you're implying that their ability is fixed and they're good. Whereas if they're good for effort, then you're implying that effort can change your results. So if we look at this experiment by Moser in 2011 using active 2 EEG scans, we can see that in the moment of failure, incremental theorists, they really light up. So these growth mindset people, they really attend to the stimuli and what's going wrong. Whereas entity theorists, they tend to just like go blank. It's almost like their mind is recoiling in horror. But of course, brain imaging is kind of difficult to interpret because it doesn't really matter what's going on in the brain. It really depends on the behavior that comes from it and also you know, the way people report to feel. In fact, this was quite a small study. It was only about 15 people. So you may be at this point questioning why I've included it. But there is good research to say that people that include brain imaging in presentations, their audience thinks it's actually more sciencey. So that's why that one's in. Luckily, we do have an experiment that confirms this with behavioral data by Schroeder in 2014. So we find that post-failure, incremental theorists, these growth mindset people, they do respond after a failure and their results pick up quickly, whereas anti-theorists are sort of like a shadow where they keep responding poorly after failure. So we have maladaptive responses to failure. You know, you can go into exercise programs and you find that kids with entity theories, they don't persist as long with a new exercise if you're like, you know, teaching them to hula hoop or something like that. They also may sometimes self-handicap and manufacture injuries to generate reasons why they failed. My brother actually was training for a marathon and decided he hadn't done enough training, it wasn't going to go very well. So rather than just quitting, which would have outed him as a failure, he decided to start running in such a way that he jarred his knees as he was running. And so eventually his knee swelled up and he said to his friends, well, look, I can't run, I've got swollen knees. So that's one way that an anti-theorist might try and escape, you know, a social decision that they're a failure. And they're also less likely to attend remedial courses. In academic domains, we know that incremental theorists, when they go poorly, they're quite happy to sign up to a course that will help them improve. The anti-theorists, they just want to be done with it. And in fact, they're more likely to sign up if they've gone well. So sort of like another opportunity to show just how smart they are by doing this extra course. So what are the applications? The real question at this point is, you know, can we change people's implicit theories? Because otherwise this is all sort of like, you know, it's academic fun to know and useful like for integrating other fields, but you need to be able to apply it. And already we know just in Dweck's experiment, changing the wording of praise to children can shift them on that scale to get different results. We know it is malleable to an extent. But it has been used in other areas, so let's go through some of those. In mental health, there was a really interesting finding just last year that preference for one-to-one therapy is dependent for having an incremental theory of anxiety. So if you believe the amount that you're a worrier can change over time, you're much more happy to have one-to-one therapy instead of medications. That implies to me that these people may engage more with that therapy and get better results. So potentially you could manipulate that. As that was last year, that hasn't been replicated and expanded upon yet, but there was a similar experiment in the prior year by Valentina that found that there is improved efficacy of exposure therapy for people with a growth mindset of shyness. So you can see here they measured to see how much performance anxiety people had before the treatment. And they found for people with an entity theory of shyness, which is the top line there, they still had much higher performance anxiety at the end of the exposure therapy. And the growth mindset line below, they had less. So it's showing that, you know, these people that really need help, growth mindset helps them get more out of that therapy, which is really cool. It's even been applied to the Middle East. So, you know, with trait attributions and stereotyping, obviously in-group, out-group conflicts, this could start to become relevant. A research group led by Halperin looked into this, and they took a group of Israelis and they assessed their conceptions of group malleability. And they found that those correlated with positive attitudes towards Palestinians. So building on top of that, they then took two groups, one group of Israeli and one group of Palestinians, and they did a classic intervention in the growth mindset literature, which is where they get them to read a bogus article about the fact that groups can change based on cultural or political circumstances. And they found, you know, just reading this article over a control article increased their willingness to meet up, which is a good sign for peace in the region, and to compromise. So it's clear, because failure is sort of synonymous with life, you really can apply this growth mindset literature to many areas. And it's been done to bullying. So Jaeger did a series of experiments with grade 8 and grade 9 students. And he found that overall, when you get entity theorists to recall conflicts, they're much more likely to want vengeance for that over people with a growth mindset of bullies and victims. So the idea that, you know, someone is a bully and that's who they are, and someone's a victim, that's who they are. That sort of dichotomy. They also then gave them some vignettes where they said, okay, you're walking down a corridor and someone does something ambiguous like bumps you in the shoulder, and they ask, well, why did they do that to you? The entity theorists they found were more likely to say it's because that other person's a bad person, and they're also more likely to interpret that really ambiguous provocation as hostile. So then they said, well, how can we use this? They created, well, firstly, with the first one, they used simply another Psychology Today article talking about neuroscience, and they found that, you know, that did drop desires for vengeance, which is good. But then they also worked on a 6-week course, and they found that this hostile intent attribution as a result of this course was reduced, including the desire for vengeance. And also, it was maintained for 8 months, which is really good for a psychological intervention. Like, generally, you'll come in with a hugely resource-intensive exercise, you put it through it. At the end of the 2 weeks, you'll get a small result and go, oh, that's good. And then you'll come back and it's gone. And it's like, well, what have we been spending all this money on? So having an 8-month maintenance is really good. This is just showing before and after the experiment responses to ambiguous provocation. So you can see the gray line is the control group, who were getting an experimental, they were learning that athletic skills were malleable. You can see that they're, on the whole, significantly more likely to interpret this ambiguous provocation as negative. On the other side, you can see that growth mindset people are much more likely to actually start perceiving them as positive. So following this, they actually looked at, can we reduce aggressive responses? So the way they did this is they used a cyberball protocol. So in cyberball, you have the participant and two fake people that are controlled by a computer throwing a ball in a game of catch. And eventually, the two computers just play catch between each other and exclude this person. When you do this to teenagers, they get really angry. So to measure just how angry they got, Jaeger and his team, they allowed them to then prescribe how much hot sauce the other two people were going to have to eat as a way of getting back at them. And they did this workshop again, and they found that the incremental theory workshop participants, compared to a control of a coping skills workshop and a no treatment workshop, they delivered significantly less hot sauce for this exclusion. On top of that, they were also allowed to write a note with it, and they found that generally these notes were like narky things like, I've given you hot sauce because you said you don't like spicy. But in the case of the incremental theory, they started almost trying to reform each other by writing pro-social ones, like showing them kindness, saying, listen, I know you don't like hot sauce, so I've tried to give you as little as possible, that sort of thing. So that's really cool. And you can see, interesting enough, you don't get that same effect with the coping skills group, which is sort of like the gold standard they're trying to compare it against. And here they've looked at the actual improvement in behavior of people. So generally, non-victims, there's not many behavioral problems potentially, which is why they've split them here, or they didn't get the results they wanted, either way. But on the other hand, victims, you can see that for the incremental theory group, they actually have a significantly greater number of nominations for improved conduct by teachers over coping skills, who then has a greater amount than the no treatment group. And finally, they actually found that with the victims with no treatment, there was actually an increase in depressive symptoms, which was not seen in coping skills or the incremental theory. So it was useful for that. And these are sample sizes of about 300 or 400. So obviously, a workshop is still quite intensive. So the next step was to reduce it to just a reading and writing task. So now they're just reading the Psychology Today article, and they're also making use of the same as believing effect. By writing also, just.
I was just wondering, how long was the workshop?
That was 6 weeks.
So it was like an hour a week?
I think half an hour to an hour. I don't know off the top of my head.
And every workshop was focused on improving their incremental theory?
So basically the workshop involves stuff like teaching them about neuroplasticity, about how the brain works, about when you're failing, you're actually learning and your brain's literally stretching like a muscle and reorganizing itself. Yeah. So this was much simpler, and now they're just reading an article about neuroplasticity and how people change over time and the brain structure changes over time. And they then had to write a letter to someone in the next cohort, basically advertising this and teaching them about it as a way to kind of make it stick. So they found this reduced negative reactions to exclusion via cyberball. They found that the kids had less stress and illness later in the year based on self-report. They had better relative academic performance to their peers. And in a follow-up study, they actually found that they had prevented 40% of cases of depression, which immediately does look too good to be true. And that hasn't been replicated yet, as that was only last year. But what they think has happened here is generally as people go through year 8 and year 9 and early puberty, there is the upswing in depressive symptoms. They're suggesting that this hasn't actually reduced depressive symptoms in people that already have them, it's just prevented that upswing. Potentially through getting kids to be nicer to each other and helping them to have better reactions to social ostracization and similar. This is just a graph of the grades over the years. You can see as people go towards year 9, the grades drop for everyone, but the solid white line is people that did the reading and writing task for growth mindset, and you can see there is a significant sort of advantage to doing it, sort of buffered the effect of the drop. So at this stage, it'd be very easy to label growth mindset as sort of like a cure-all panacea. But obviously, like any good psychological intervention, it is highly context dependent. And this is some of the problems with some of these other results that make it to the media. They sort of go like wildfire and all caution goes to the wind. But actually, just this year, there's been a new study come out by Park and Kim. This actually showed that some circumstances where entity theorists actually outperform growth mindset people. So in this experiment, they got a bunch of participants to do an anagram task, and then they told them they failed at it. And they asked, would you like to do that anagram task again or something different? As you expect, the growth mindset people said, we'd like to do it again. The entity theorists said, oh, no, I'd like to do something different, actually. So then they repeated it, and this time they actually forced half the group to do something different and half the group to do the same task again. And they found that when they were forced to do a different task, which was actually the same task, they just told them it was measuring something different, they found that now entity theorists are suddenly outperforming the growth mindset people. So it could be it's not that growth mindset people respond better to failure, it's just they respond differently to failure.
Is that a Korean study? These guys are Korean, eh?
I'm not sure. I'm looking at, I can't remember the nationality.
They would be Korean, and there are significant differences, I think, in the effort and the attribution between the countries. So you might be having cultural differences.
Okay, so this could be a cultural difference. We'll keep in mind. But certainly, you know, providing this is true for the West, and I'm not sure now that you've said that. But we are talking about a very specific environment in schools where the majority of these studies are done. For instance, if you start failing in a maths exam or going poorly at maths and decide, well, you know, stuff this, I'm going to be an English professor, you can't just quit math and then only do English, or you can't quit math and go, you know, start doing plumbing or something like that. Like then, you're sort of stuck to keep going through mathematics. You know, so it is really cooked towards growth mindset people, providing that it isn't just cultural difference. And certainly, even in our society, you know, it's really easy to run away with ideas about growth mindset because it does, at our cultural level, it does really like click in with everything we believe in. Like, we believe in capitalism, which says that people are created equal, and the only differential between them is how much effort they put in. So if someone doesn't have a job and is a drug addict, it's because, you know, they don't care or try hard enough. Leaving aside the best way to make money is to be born in a family with money who already has a good education with no trauma. So I think, you know, growth mindset, because it is all about effort, it really affirms everything we believe in and our whole sort of structure of society. And I think we also really want to like escape the fact that we do have biological limitations. We are animals. Like even if you look at very like recently into our past, 70,000 years ago with Homo erectus, actually alive at the same time as Homo sapiens and actually interbred. So looking at the biological definition of the species, maybe not even a different species. And if you look at their stone tools, this actually spans 1 million years of development in stone tools from the left to the right. You can see there's hardly any improvement. So what I'm really trying to point out here is this wasn't a lack of persistence or effort. This was clearly a genetic deficit that didn't allow for the great creativity that we started seeing in Homo sapiens about 40,000 years ago. And although it's clear that, you know, our horizons have really expanded a lot, they haven't expanded to an infinite plane. We still do have biological and environmental constraints, which is something we don't like to really consider because we like to think, you know, we're enlightened beings and we can do whatever the hell we want. But also one more point I'd like to make about all this is, you know, entity theories, quitting isn't necessarily bad. This is Walt Disney. He used to be a newspaper editor, and he was fired because he lacked imagination and creativity. You know, now, you know, he's, instead of persisting in newspaper editing, you know, I'll get another job, I'll double down my efforts, he said, well, you know, I'll go into animation, and he's created one of the most beloved companies ever. Similarly, Isaac Newton, he was once destined to be a farmer, but was so bad that he was shipped off to college. I mean, imagine if Isaac Newton had a growth mindset of farming. You know, where would our physics be now? And one last famous face, this is me. When I was really young, I wanted to be an actor, and my mum sat me down and said, James, you need to be really good looking to be an actor. I don't know if you guys know the phrase, a face only a mother could love. Apparently it wouldn't apply in this instance.
Is that really you?
That's definitely me. So I'm just saying, like, persistence is usually judged as good, but it depends on persisting in what? I mean, you only have to watch 30 minutes of American Idol, and you see a lot of people, you think, you know, really, don't quit your day job. So, but, you know, you really need wisdom to see between, you know, is this something that we should be working towards, or should you try and find something that you're better suited to based on your environmental and genetic conditions? And if you told an economist that you wanted everyone to be growth mindset and persist with the first idea that came into their head, you know, I think you'd need to sit them down and pour them a stiff drink. Another example of this is beauty. So we've actually found that people with a growth mindset of beauty are more likely to say they want cosmetic surgery, value beauty, and have more unrealistic ideas about body image. So, you know, persisting is not necessarily good in every circumstance. Finally, psychometrics. I mean, this is really where we're plagued in the field of growth mindset. So the basic format we have to make a growth mindset scale is one, you have 3 questions and you average them to get a score. So 1, you have a certain amount of X and you really can't do much to change it. Your X is something about you that you can't change much. You can improve a little, but you really can't change your basic X. And because these things are so sort of easy to spew out, we have loads of them. So I'll just go through some of them that I've come across. Theory of intelligence, theory of mathematical ability, theory of emotion, theory of anxiety, theory of weight loss, theory of personality, theory of morality, theory of group malleability, theory of bullies and victims, theory of beauty, theory of shyness, and the CNAC 2, which is one for physical ability. Obviously in here, like, for some of these, factor analysis has not been done at all. In fact, for most of them, only the theory of personality, I know it's been done, the CNAC 2, I know it's been done, I think theory of shyness, it might have been done. But clearly some of these domains there's going to be overlap that hasn't been identified. So we're in a difficult situation now. It's like, is the research on emotion applicable to anxiety, and is that applicable to shyness? So these are some of the problems we need to start sort of working out. So this comes to the research we've just sort of started at the IPPE. So we've got a study of 8,000 Americans, and what we really want to try and find out is, you know, first we want to evaluate these growth mindset measures psychometrically, because before we know that these are good measures, you really can't go forward, and it's really sort of unfortunate this hasn't been done properly before. We also want to explore how growth mindset operates at a population level. You know, if we did have a big shiny red button that said everyone should be growth mindset, should we actually press that? What is the effect? Because there's a real lack of studies that look at it at that zoomed out level. And finally, the limiting factors. Where should this be applied, if at all? So we had 8,000 participants. The mean age is 49 with a standard deviation of 16.9, 52% female. This is old data, but we did have in the theory of intelligence, the theory of personality, and the theory of morality. Those top 2 are perhaps the top 2 scales. So we did some confirmatory factor analysis. So we wanted to see, can we reduce this? Should they all be 3 separate factors, or should it be 2? It should be 1. What we found is the 3-factor model where they're all separate. That was a great fit. The 2-factor model, we conflated the theory of personality and the theory of morality because they were highly correlated at 0.68. And also, just at a face value, you know, your moral characteristics can't change and your personal characteristics can't change. They just seem similar. We found that that 2-factor model actually was even slightly better fit and certainly simpler.
What was the 3-factor model?
So just the theory of intelligence, theory of personality, and theory of morality is 3 separate latent variables.
Oh, okay. Why didn't you have a 6-factor model?
Oh, we only had 3 actual scales in the study.
Oh, okay. So
yeah.
you weren't measuring a separate incremental and entity scales.
Oh no, they're all integrated.
Okay.
Yeah.
So you're assuming that it's a perfect bipolar scale.
Well, there's been a bit of research in this previous where they actually looked and found that questions posed in incremental ones, because people just loved growth mindset statements in general, they actually, even when they identified them as entity theorists, they'd never disagree to the incremental statements. So they're all statements in support of entity theories, where rejection of which is assumed to be support of growth mindset.
Okay, so this is just entity items?
Yeah, these are entity items.
So you're actually not even measuring mindset?
Yeah, we need that.
Or at least not incremental.
Yeah, that would be a fair criticism of the scales, which people have tried to get around, but as I've said, just because everyone, because of the cultural heritage, I guess, loves growth mindset and that sort of mentality, they accept, even if they reject them like implicitly.
And how many items did you say? 3?
3 items in each.
For each domain.
Yeah.
Each domain, okay.
Yeah.
Pretty reasonable to think that it's bipolar, right? I mean, it's almost imperative, right? If it's not entity, it has to be incremental, and if it's not incremental, it has to be entity.
Yeah. So the items are stuff like, no matter how hard someone tries, their level of intelligence can't
I'm well familiar with the scale. I've done lots of research with it.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the label line, unfortunately. Okay, so and then we found one factor, which is everything conflated onto one latent variable. It was no longer a good fit. It was a significant drop. So following this, we wanted to make sure it had adequate discriminant validity. The correlates in general with other self-concepts like hope weren't very high. They were only like 0.2. But we felt that it still had a lot in common with hope. Like if you believe that things are bad now, but in the future they can improve, that to us just sounds like hope. So we wanted to check that this was different. So for this, we did a method where you start with hope separate to growth mindset, which is model A. And we find that that's a good fit. Then we take hope and we conflate it with the second factor of growth mindset, so with the theory of personality and the person and moral growth. And we check that fit, and now it's a significant drop and no longer a good fit. And then we take hope and put it on the first factor again, which is model C. We find again it's not good. So this tells us that growth mindset and hope should be dealt with separately, and they're not the same issue. Okay. And finally, we wanted to look at age and gender invariance of these scales. So one scale that may be reliable for males may not be for females or for young people or old people. We found in this case there actually is good evidence for strict invariance for males and females, so gender invariance, and strong invariance for ages when it's split into deciles. So just some basic descriptives on these scales in the population. For the theory of intelligence, people are biased towards a growth mindset. So the center of the scale is 3, so 3.92 is tending towards growth mindset with an SDE of 1.2. And for person moral growth, similarly 3.5, so skewed toward growth mindset. So these are the main correlates we found. So we found it was correlated with self-esteem, hope, non-attachment, and you can see the first number is theory of intelligence, second number is for person moral growth. Self-kindness, diffusion, mindfulness, self-compassion, the ability to observe thoughts and emotions, non-reacting, distress endurance, authentic striving, and striving importance, and striving progress. So these are all good protective factors. Unfortunately for the really big ticket ones, for income, growth mindset people actually were earning significantly and slightly less, and education the same. So this is kind of unfortunate if you really want to tout a growth mindset intervention to policymakers, because asking them to throw away a potential chunk of GDP is really difficult. Yeah, but obviously these are correlations and you can't imply causation from it. For instance, this is the correlation between Internet Explorer usage going down and murder rates decreasing, which we have to take obviously with a grain of salt.
I think that's common.
Yeah. So the last sort of thing we wanted to look at, we felt from this background of research that the places where growth mindset shines is when things have gone wrong. Like we saw in the experiment with bullies and victims, the victims were the one that benefited most from growth mindset. So the way we looked at this, we took a lack of progress on any strivings, which is stuff like, I want to be a good mother is a striving. We took that as when things are bad, and we looked at how hope changes with this. So first up, this is a 3D graph, which is almost unreadable, but I made in R, so I wanted to show that. Yeah, thank you. With help from Jesse, I actually can't claim that one at all. This is a 2D graph, which is readable. So you can see as striving progress decreases, generally there's a drop in hope. This drop is buffered for people with a high growth mindset, with a 2 standard deviation increase in growth mindset. And if you look on the other hand where things are good, actually the difference between the growth mindset people and the entity theorists based on these scales is actually quite small. So it's showing that growth mindset does shine where things are bad, at least in terms of maintaining hope. And we found similarly that hope is protected when emotional control is low, when emotional well-being is low, when psychological well-being is low, and social well-being is low. So this is really great. But we obviously need longitudinal studies to actually figure out, do these correlations mean anything? Which direction does it flow? We need further psychometrics. We still have another 15 scales that haven't been fit into a structure, and we don't know whether they overlap. And I would also like to apply growth mindset to self-improvement interventions. And we've actually got a mindfulness study coming up where we're seeing, does growth mindset help people who had a bad experience of that mindfulness? Does it help them actually intend to go on and take up a regular practice? So hopefully we'll see a difference there. So in summary, growth mindset is not a cure-all. It's heavily context-dependent. Growth mindset may be most valuable for people when things have gone awry. Entity theories do have value, and growth mindset interventions are most appropriate when quitting is not an option, I'm going to say. Not really a summary, it's really a new point. But yeah, so when you have someone, like I said before, who has heart disease and exercising is the only thing left that can save their life, that's when you need persistence, because quitting and deciding I'm not a runner at that point is not an option. So that's when I think growth mindset really should be applied first and foremost. Thank you.
James, was that relationship with SES significant?
It was significant.
Because we were just talking about this. This is an awesome finding. We were just looking at a review article that suggests that rich people like to believe in entity theories because it means that I'm a god because I have the natural talent.
Yeah, but funnily enough, rich people are also more likely to praise effort rather than ability to their kids, which is, you know, a strange sort of backward relationship. Yeah, so if you're rich, so rich people in general are more likely to be entity theorists, but they're also more likely when their kids succeed to praise their effort as opposed to their ability. I don't know if that just means they're all afforded to buy growth mindset books or
What were the two factors in the psychometric one where you had the three domains? You said that the two-factor model fit best. What were the two factors?
So we had the theory of intelligence as one factor, and the theory of personality and theory of morality we combined into a single factor. So those were the two factors.
The factors are really highly correlated, so it made sense to combine them in the test.
So essentially what you're saying is that it's domain general. It's a global construct that cuts across domains.
Yeah, well, we still found that there was a difference between intelligence and the person's moral growth. So we think that there is domain specificity, but just not between personality and morality.
Okay.
Yeah, because we found that the one-factor model way it was just all together, that wasn't a good fit.
Probably an interesting area for you to take a look at is the goal theory research, because the mastery performance goal distinction is pretty much the same as this. I would guess that you wouldn't be able to distinguish between them if you had the measures for both of them. And there's quite a controversy. I mean, initially there was a focus on mastery is good, performance is bad, sort of almost an Orwellian sort of notion of that. And that's broken down pretty much. And there's lots of areas where the performance orientation is actually productive, and also some arguments that adaptability and to be able to use one or the other in different situations is pretty good. And also some issues about the interaction between the two of them. And clearly those scales are moderately correlated. I mean, it's certainly not a bipolar sort of continuum.
Is performance focused on outcome, whereas mastery is focused on self-development? Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think, because actually in the growth mindset literature, they actually find that entity theorists are more likely to have the performance orientation. So it could be the implicit belief is the upstream cause of the orientations. We find a difference there, which would also give you a plane to intervene on. But obviously, those areas of literature are very closely, or should be closely linked.
Yeah, I guess it's more the mastery orientation that fits with the growth mindset. Maybe not so much the entity being equivalent to the performance.
I think Marty Collington has his 2001 paper in the annual review of Psych looks at the relationship between mastery and growth mindset.
What do you find?
The same thing.
Huh?
The same thing.
Yeah.
I mean, in fairness, it's pretty close to the same.
They're similar.
Yeah. So it's in his interest. I mean, he also said that self-determination theory is also the same thing.
The what?
He said that self-determination theory is also the same thing. So,
Okay.
unsurprisingly, he's the father of goal theory.
There you go.
Two things. First, I have been following the literature on intelligence, and nobody talks about this. I don't know why. You might have a theory about that. it just has not been accepted by when Beck's papers came out. There was some discussion, but it was just thrown away. The other one is the difference between cultures, and there is a very strong emphasis in Asian cultures, in Confucian cultures on effort. They all think that effort is the only thing. They don't even talk about ability. And there should be some pronounced differences in the effects that you're talking about. And I forgot what was the what was the third one that I wanted to bring up. But this cultural difference is quite important, I think.
Yeah,
you can look at...
Oh yeah, I remember what I wanted to say. What is the relationship of your measures with some of the other measures, like personality measures of conscientiousness, for example?
Well, these aren't our measures, but they're... because it's just the extent to which you believe that your personality can change, that's different to actually get, like, so you could well, let's say for intelligence, for instance, you could be highly intelligent but believe that intelligence is fixed. So I don't think there's really overlap there. So I think that's just sort of the difference. It's not how much you have, it's just how stable you think it is.
Isn't the Confucian culture very hierarchical? And I'm just wondering, with societies that you're describing that are very hierarchical, do they see people in the elevated status being somehow fundamentally different? Yeah, like everybody should work, especially you guys working in the fields. Empathy is really important, you know. But I wonder if they think, yeah, hard work will get me a little bit higher status in my village, but I'll never be the leader of, you know what I mean? So there's boundary. I guess it's interesting to think of growth mindset within boundaries. Like we've been talking about poor people thinking, oh, what's a growth mindset person who's come from a poor background? Do they ever think they could be a lawyer, or is it just that they could be the head of Aldi or something? You know, I don't know.
The head of
I just picked a city. You know what I mean? Though? I mean, like, do people put boundaries around the growth?
This point is better.
Oh, do you want to? I wasn't sure whether that was a comment or a question. Did you want to address that?
I just want, no, I mean, I don't think it's just like, can't be answered. You know?
Yeah, certainly it would be really interesting to look at cultural differences, and I'm not aware of that being done so far.
Well, it has been done with the mastery performance stuff a lot.
Okay.
And those generalize pretty surprisingly well. And then there's some PISA data that suggests that that the relationships aren't nearly as different as one would expect from cultural stereotypes.
Okay.
Yeah,
that's interesting.
One of the things that I was quite intrigued with is I would assume that my big fish little pond effect would be moderated by this. Okay. So that if you believe that ability is fixed, then your self-concept is, being in a selective school is going to have a negative effect on your self-concept, and if you have a performance, whatever, but it didn't.
Okay.
There was no, it didn't, I didn't look at mindset per se, but I looked at mastery, which I think is pretty similar.
Yeah.
And there was a big push there, and I've gotten into an ongoing discussion with Andy Elliott, who definitely believes that, disbelieves my results. So the idea would be that if you have a mastery orientation, then you're not going to be, the social comparison process isn't going to be nearly as strong.
Okay, that's interesting.
So, two things that I was thinking about. First thing I was thinking about is that SES growth mindset relationship's awesome, because we were just talking about that. We should definitely chase that up. But also in that data set we have IP addresses, so we can get census level data on. And so it would be interesting to look at whether the positive relationship between growth mindset and certain outcomes is moderated by, the context that you're in. There's some research, I think I've talked to you about it beforehand, which suggests that some of these positive relationships are only positive when there's lots of resources around, and when there isn't, not so much. And on that front, there's also maybe a developmental kind of story in which, so in transition literature, that it's good to have a growth mindset up to the transition, but then afterwards it's better to have an entity. Because you can switch. So I think from from my kind of research background, it would suggest that growth mindset up to the transition of university is awesome, but if you wanted to go to university and you don't, then it's healthier for you to switch to an entity view, which allows you to switch to another task more easily.
So you say, I just didn't have an ability, but then you re-establish growth mindset in another domain or something like that?
Well, yeah, because those people that keep on trying, so say you've got a TER, what are they called?
UAI, that's a TER too.
A UAI of like 45, and you try really hard, you're never going to get into university. You keep trying, you're delaying entry into an alternative pathway that would be beneficial.
Yeah.
And so it's often better to switch.
Well, that's kind of dependent upon this being domain specific. Because if it's domain general, then you take that mindset to your new domain as well.
Well, it looks like it's not domain general.
Well, they don't test it though. I think they just, somebody says, oh, I'm going to study it here, and I'll make up a measure for this, and then another person does another domain, and they make up another measure.
What was the correlation between the intelligence and the personality?
0.48 from memory. Yeah. But certainly when people start college...
But that's not actually an ability.
What's not an ability?
The personality. So the issue more is whether the mindset in relation to multiple abilities generalizes or not. But yeah, I'm not saying it isn't an interesting issue, but I'm saying that it's not. There's some problems with the issues that you're raising.
Well, it's pretty good research to show.
Sure. That's all the more reason to look at it.
Yeah. Okay. Certainly, when people start off at college, they tend to be theorists at getting higher marks, which implies that they've somehow found a niche that they're excelling at. But as they progress through college, their grades start going down, and the growth mindset starts increasing, which implies that the growth mindset is better suited to the repeated upsets and challenges of university. Yeah.
Can I ask a question, Jim? Is there research that answers the question of whether the ability of the growth mindset itself seems to act more like a trait, or whether it fluctuates a lot in a person's life depending on the context? More like a state. So I think part of maybe the research into this has to be a bit more clear maybe about whether this ability itself, if we're going to treat it more like a trait or more like a state, and sort that out.
Yeah, certainly it does fluctuate over the developmental period. So I think from childhood to people become more entity, I think.
Yeah.
Is that right? I think so. 50% chance.
That's too bad. How about I was thinking
more realistic.
Into old age as well. Like, I mean, there's a lot of self-stigma around getting older and believing that you can't do things. And I wonder if it just have they followed it into later years and see.
I'm not aware of it, but I would expect that you would see differences.
Well, we have the data, don't we?
What, is it correlated with age?
Yeah, we have the actual data.
Have you looked at
You have the data. You can walk out of this room and answer that question.
Yeah, we can talk about that this afternoon.
There's no stopping for you until you answer that question.
What's the database that the 8,000? What's the
It's actually
database?
not, is it?
Yeah.
7,000.
Well, 7,000 around it.
Yeah.
More.
Okay. Tell me about the data.
It's a representative sample of the United States.
7,200 less than.
But it says 7,800. It goes to the whole age spectrum. I think it'd be worth looking at that.
Yeah, from 18 to what's the highest? 78 or something is the
Oh,
highest.
I think yours as far as about 80.
But what's the range of variables? I mean, obviously this is the key to what you're looking at, but it sounds like it's a real wide range of variables.
Yeah.
It's that big matrix sampling one.
Huh?
It's a matrix
Big
sample
matrix
study.
sampling one.
Oh, okay.
And if you do look at personality over age, the correlations go up with age. So, I mean, I don't know if that doesn't mean that it's actually fixed, but in practice, people become more stable in their personality.
Yeah, well, we might find a similar effect.
And so just going on from the point I was talking about, it seems that at the moment the assumption is maybe this is a trait, right? So you're saying that these are the people that have the growth mindset.
Yeah.
But I wonder whether that people change, even within the same day.
Well, yeah. Well, it's clear that people can have there's differences across different domains, and also that these interventions, as they are, they're just reading articles about new information and they can change in one day. It is at best only semi-stable. So you wouldn't want to paint anyone permanently.
It seems to be variable across time.
Yeah.
Even if you have a short period.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's because it's essentially it's a belief.
Yeah, similar to my research. There's things even I left myself that I would be more on the growth mindset and just keep chipping away. And there's other things where I said, I'm going to suck that, and I'm going to do something else, even within the same day.
Yeah, absolutely. So that could be time differences, but also domain differences. Like you mentioned, a really strong growth mindset of stuff to do with academics, but when it comes to
rugby league or something like that.
Yeah, but rugby league you'd say, but I can't improve at that. And also what's clear is people can have two different conceptions about how other people vary. Like other people can change, but me, I'm a locked entity. So that's also another distinction, which is quite interesting.
So that might be very interesting about how people choose. It's almost like a flexibility thing to go between the two mindsets.
Yeah, and certainly as things become worse for people, like after a failure, people are more susceptible to take on a growth mindset theory because obviously that's more comforting. So there's different times when people are more susceptible to taking new beliefs on.
Right, yeah.
Another relevant factor to that is to what extent is it a sort of bipolar versus a scale as well?
Yeah.
And so, your growth mindset might fluctuate over time, but the way it's measured is as a scale, isn't it? And typically they just take, each end of the scale and say your growth and your entity.
Yeah.
And that's kind of.
But you're using it as
we're using it as a continuous here. It has been used
okay.
So when we talk about growth of fits, we're talking about tending towards growth of fits, but we still study it as a continuous variable.
Because I know several of Dweck's studies just took people that were like 5 and 6 versus 1 and 2 on the scale.
Yeah, some people would take like a 3.5 split.
Right, okay, but you haven't done that.
We haven't done that.
Okay. It makes sense. We also talked about mindset, I can't remember if there's anything we could do about it or whatnot, of whether growth mindset might be good for your mental health, but may lead you to treat other people more poorly, because if you believe that you can change, then so can everybody else.
Yeah. Well, actually, in relationships, that's interesting. In intimate relationships, partners believe their partner can change. They actually judge them very harshly when they fail to.
Yeah.
So yeah, there's a really
because it always makes me worry about CBT,
Yeah.
I mean, anecdotally, I see people who have done CBT. They do get better, but then they kind of treat everybody else.
Yeah, no, I think that's definitely an issue.
Well, the premise is if you're poor, it's because you didn't try hard enough.
Yeah.
Kinds of things come from that growth mindset idea.
Yeah, that's fair.
Yeah, so incremental doesn't mean compassionate.
No.
Although you were finding they were more
compassionate
and empathetic.
I think they tend to try and, this is off the cuff, they tend to try and reform others, so they believe people can change. So when other people might judge someone else, when other people might judge someone else harshly and lock them into that state of you're a bad person, they're willing to open it up and see if they can improve. But then if they don't improve, that's when they'll go, okay, yeah, seriously, get off your ass and do something.
Got this. I can tell you, I can make a ton of money. Design a measure that you administer just before the wedding day, whatever, to measure the extent your wife thinks you're fixed or changeable. Are you changeable? And husband. There could be a husband.
Yeah. So there's also evidence saying that people with like a flexible view of the relationship, they can change over time. They're more likely to have, open and frank conversation and do all these things that are good and stable and reforming to each other. So it does come up with some good things. It's just if one partner makes a promise to change and then they don't change, that's when they're just like, well, come on. Yeah. So there's pluses and minuses. It's not a clear cut.
You knew what you got when you married me. I'm the same with pluses. I'm an argue entity.
Yeah. All right, guys. Thank you very much.
Thanks.